Hi folks, HR Funk here with my brand new Springfield Armory M1A Loaded rifle, complete with the Leatherwood Hilux M1000 auto ranging and trajectory scope. I'm going to be reviewing this rifle for you today, but first there's a story about how this rifle came into my possession. As many of you know, I'm a former United States Marine, and a lot of you also know that for many years I was a sniper for my police department's tactical team. Largely for those two reasons, my lifetime hero is the late Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock. I think the gunny exemplified what it is to be both a Marine and a sniper better than probably anyone else ever has. And whenever I go up to Camp Perry for the national matches every year, it's never too far from the front of my mind that I'm walking on the same ground that he walked on and shooting on the same ranges that he shot on. And that, more than anything else, might explain how I ended up purchasing this rifle. This past July, while attending the national matches at Camp Perry, I made my annual trip down Commercial Row with my credit card quaking in its boots with every step. And near the end of Commercial Row, I walked into a small gun shop from Davenport, Iowa, and when I walked through the door, I noticed immediately there was a rack of rifles and shotguns in front of me, and my eyes very quickly fell on this one. When I saw this rifle in the rack, it was immediately apparent that it is not set up in national match configuration. Rather, it's set up as a sniper system. In fact, it's essentially a modernized equivalent to the military's M21 sniper system used back during the Vietnam War. Now, I don't know that Gunny Hathcock ever used an M21 system, but the fact that other snipers did and used it to good effect, and the fact that I'm a former sniper, really made this rifle appeal to me. Added to that is the fact that it has the Leatherwood M1000 scope attached. Now, there's another story about this scope that I'll go into in a little bit. But in all, maybe the ghost of the good gunny was with me that day and helping push my hand toward that credit card. I'm not sure, but in any case, this rifle came home with me from Camp Perry, and I was extremely excited to get the rifle and get it out on the range and see what kind of performance I could get from it. Now, before this video is over, we're going to take a trip to the range and you'll get to see just how well the rifle shoots. Now, as I said, the scope that's attached to my rifle has its own story. This is not the original art scope that was attached to this rifle when I purchased it. The original was an older version of the art scope called an M600. And that particular scope is probably at this point 20 years old. And when I went to the range to originally zero my rifle, that scope did not have enough windage adjustment to be able to get a proper zero. So I contacted Hilux Leatherwood and made them aware of the problem that I was having. I also made it very obvious or very plain that I was not the original purchaser of that scope. Even so, they said to send it back and they would see if there was anything they could do to it to make it work with my rifle. Once they received the scope, they determined that that particular scope did not have enough windage adjustment to be able to make it function properly with this rifle. So there was some communication back and forth, and they made me what I thought was a very generous allowance for that older M600 on the purchase of a new scope from them. Now, you may not know it, but there is a brand new version of the M1000 scope that just came out this year, and it has some features that enhance its capabilities above the traditional M1000, which is what's now on this rifle. Among those, it has a new reticle. It's a lighted reticle, and it has a parallax adjustment, and there are also some other enhancements that have been given to the new version of the M1000. And the original offer from Leatherwood was to get one of the brand new versions of the M1000 scope. And when I looked at it, I think it's a very good scope. I think it has a lot going for it, but I looked at that reticle, and there's a lot going on in that reticle. And I'm an old school sniper. I was taught on a scope with a simple mil-dot reticle, and I much prefer that clean sight picture when I look through that type of a reticle, and I really just didn't want to learn everything that went along with that new style reticle. Now that being said, I'm sure for younger shooters and snipers who are trained on that type of a reticle, it probably has a lot of features and functions that they're able to use. I just didn't want to work hard enough to learn all that. I preferred the older, simpler style reticle. Fortunately, the folks that I talked to at Hilux said that they had some of the older M1000 scopes that have the no math mil-dot reticle, which has a much cleaner sight picture, and that was the one that I ultimately purchased from them, and that's what now resides on my M1A loaded rifle. One other thing that appealed to me about this scope is the fact that I've heard Corbett Leatherwood say that this was the last scope actually designed by his father, Jim Leatherwood, before his passing. Jim Leatherwood being the designer of the original art scope back during the 1960s, and I really like the idea that this is one of his designs. So kudos to Hilux Leatherwood for standing behind their product. Now let's take a look at this rifle. At its heart, the action of the M1A Loaded is nothing more than a civilian legal version of the military's M14, which itself was an improved version of the action used by the M1 Garand rifle. As such, it has all of the inherent reliability and endurance characteristics of that storied design. The M1A Loaded features the use of a national match front sight for a finer sight picture than would be possible with a standard GI version. And the rear sight features an aperture that measures 521 thousandths of an inch in diameter. The rear sight is also adjustable in half-minute of angle clicks for windage and 1 minute of angle clicks for elevation. One of the big differences between the Springfield Armory M1A Loaded and their standard M1A rifle is the barrel. The M1A Loaded features the use of a 6-groove, medium-weight, air-gauged match-grade barrel with a right-hand rifling twist and a twist ratio of 1 turn in 11 inches. The M1A Loaded also uses a 2-stage match-grade trigger. Now, according to the advertising, the trigger is supposed to break between 4.5 and 5 pounds, and this trigger feels a little heavier than that to me. I'm going to break out my trigger pull scale and find out exactly where that trigger is breaking. And here we go. I've got the trigger pull gauge fired up. Let's find out exactly where this trigger is breaking. £5, 13.9 ounces, so just below 6 pounds. Let's try another pull. £5, 10 ounces. And one more. £5, 12.3 ounces. So it's coming in at about 5 3/4 pounds. That is a little heavier than the advertised pull weight, but it's very smooth and it has a very nice break. So little heavier trigger, but still a good trigger on this M1A Loaded rifle. Probably the biggest visible difference between my M1A Loaded and some other versions of the Springfield Armory M1A Loaded and other versions of the M1A or M14 in general is this Archangel adjustable stock. The stock has several features that make it particularly well suited for a rifle that's going to be used out of doors for precision rifle work or even for sniper use. Beginning with the fact that it's manufactured from a carbon fiber glass reinforced polymer that's impervious to temperature, humidity, or any other environmental elements that can cause a wood stock to potentially swell or even contract and change the pressure that the stock is exerting on the action or even on the barrel and cause potentially the point of impact for that barrel or for that rifle to change because of those changing atmospheric factors. With the Archangel stock being impervious to any of those type of factors, the rifle's point of impact should not change regardless of the conditions the rifle is being used in. The stock also features an adjustable cheek piece that can be raised or lowered as necessary to allow the shooter to obtain a proper cheek weld and, more importantly, to obtain proper alignment between their shooting eye and the scope's reticle. This is particularly important with the M14 action because, as you can see, when a scope is mounted to the action, it is very high above the bore's center line. The original GI stock was intended to align the shooter's eye with the rear sight, and it's almost always necessary when a scope is installed to add a cheek piece or something else to raise the shooter's eye to get that proper alignment with the ocular lens. The cheek piece has a range of 1 3/4 inches from its lowest setting to its highest setting to allow the shooter to get that proper shooting eye alignment, and thereby eliminate any possibility for a parallax error introduced because the eye is out of proper alignment with the center line of the scope. The stock also has an adjustable length of pull that can be adjusted from 13.5 inches to almost 15 inches to accommodate shooters of different statures. The pistol grip of the stock features a very comfortable palm swell, and it positions the shooter's trigger finger properly for engaging the trigger. The Archangel stock has 2 mounting points on either side for the quick detach slings. It also has 2 of the more traditional sling swivel studs on the bottom. I've paired my rifle with a Turner Saddlery all-weather sling to make a system that's virtually impervious to the elements. And lastly, the stock has a storage compartment on the bottom of the pistol grip. So there's the rundown on the features of the M1A Loaded rifle. Now let's talk about how it shoots. About a week ago, after receiving and installing the M1000 scope, I headed back to the range for another zeroing session. And I was in a little bit of a hurry that day, so I didn't take my recording equipment with me, and I wish I had. Because after zeroing the scope, I set up at a distance of 300 yards and started to fire some 3-shot groups. My very first 3-shot group from that distance of 300 yards came in at .65 MOA. After that, I put up an FBIQ target, went back to the 300-yard line and fired another 3-shot group, and that one measured right at ½ minute of angle. Now fortunately, I did have my phone with me, and as you can see, I got photographs of those targets. So now we're going to head back to the range and see how the M1A Loaded performs today. And here I am back on the range with my M1A Loaded rifle. In just a couple of minutes, I'm going to start to do some shooting with this rifle, and I'm going to do things a little bit differently today than I did the last time I was here. When I was here before, primarily I was concerned with zeroing the scope and also making sure that I had the calibration properly set for the trajectory cam. In that process, I kept the cam and the power ring on the Leatherwood Arch scope locked together, so when I shot my groups that you saw in the targets previously, that was with a power setting of about 2.75 magnification. Today, I'm going to reset the trajectory cam to 300 yards because once again, I'm going to be shooting from 300 yards, but I'm going to uncouple the power ring from the trajectory cam, and I'm also going to then turn the power up to a full 10 power and see just what kind of accuracy I can eke out of the M1A Loaded with the scope all the way to its fullest magnification. At this point, I've moved the rifle into position, and I've also tightened down this thumb screw on the back of the trajectory cam, and that has locked it in place. I have it directly between 250 and 300 meters, and since the power ring, or the trajectory cam rather, is calibrated in meters, I have to make that correction in my mind. Now I know 300 yards is just over 274 meters, so I have the power ring and the trajectory cam set right between 250 meters and 300 meters. Now what I'm going to do is loosen this screw and that will allow me to pull back on the power ring about 1/8 of an inch and separate it from the trajectory cam. Now I can turn the power all the way up to 10 power on the scope, and I have the trajectory cam set at the proper setting for 300 yards. So with all that done, let's do some shooting and see how the M1A Loaded does with the scope set up this way. The ammunition for today's test is 168 grain Federal gold medal match ammunition. Now when I zeroed the rifle, I used my hand load, which featured a 168 grain Sierra Match King bullet, the same thing as the Federal gold medal match uses. But it's possible, since that was a hand load and this is a factory load, they could print to slightly different points of impact. So when I go down to check the first target, I'm going to see if I need to tweak it at all with regard to the scope setting for the Federal gold medal match. Then I'll try a few shots on another target and see how they look. My first target is going to be a bullseye target because once again, I just want to see if I need to make any corrections using this ammunition as opposed to the ammunition I used to zero the rifle. And when I get to the second target, it's going to be an FBI Q target that looks at least a little bit more humanoid. Okay, the magazine is loaded, the chamber is charged. Let's see what kind of accuracy I can get out of the M1A Loaded today. And there's 3 shots on the bullseye target. I am getting a pretty good left to right mirage that I can see through the scope today. So we'll see when we get down there if those shots might be printing a little bit off to the right. But let's go take a look at the target and see how I did. Folks, I hope the resolution on the camera is good enough for you to be able to see these 3 shots. Those 3 shots are slightly to the right, and I expected that because of the mirage that I was seeing in my scope, but still, all 3 are in the 10 ring from 300 yards, and that group measures just under 2 inches, so well under minute of angle for those 3 shots from 300 yards. It looks like the gold medal match is printing just slightly higher than my hand loads, but not enough to worry about making any kind of a sight correction. So I'm going to go back, set up again, and try 3 more shots on the Q target. And just like that, here I am back again on the 300-yard line. I've got the Q target set up on the target board. I've got my chamber charged. Let's try 3 more shots and see how the M1A Loaded does with this target. That's 3 more. Let's go take a look at the target. On second thought, before I head down range, how about a 300-yard headshot? Let's see how this goes. Okay, now let's head down range and take a look at the target. And there we go, folks. No problem whatsoever keeping those shots on the Q target. Now the group is obviously a little bit bigger than we saw on the bullseye target, and I'm not surprised by that because the Q target lacks a really well-defined aiming point. So when I aim at the target, I try to center the crosshairs as best I can, and I'm sure I just allowed them to wander a little bit as I was pressing the trigger. This is certainly a reflection of me, not a reflection of the mechanical accuracy of the rifle or the scope for that matter. And how about that 300-yard headshot? No problem with that whatsoever. This person would have been done with any kind of evil intentions, and I continue to be extremely, extremely impressed by the accuracy of the M1A loaded rifle and that Leatherwood M1000 scope. And there you go, folks. With that accuracy demonstration out of the way, let's head back to the shop. So there you go, folks. That's the type of performance I'm getting from the Springfield Armory M1A loaded rifle and the Leatherwood M1000 scope. And I've got to say, when I first purchased this rifle, I went online to do some research and find out what kind of accuracy other shooters were getting with it. And I was less than encouraged by some of the reviews that I saw. It seemed like there were multiple people that did not have good reviews with regard to the accuracy they were getting from their M1A loaded. Now, some of those rifles were chambered for the 6.5 Creedmoor cartridge. Others were chambered for the 7.62 NATO cartridge, the same as mine. So when I originally went to the range, I was not sure at all what kind of accuracy to expect from this system. And the very first time I tried to zero it with that original M600 scope, even though I could not properly adjust the windage to get a good zero, I did fire one 3-shot group, and it was sub-minute of angle. Since that time, and since the M1000 scope has been installed, I've fired multiple sub-MOA groups, one of which you saw in the video just a few moments ago. And the accuracy that I'm getting is very, very good. In fact, I would say that I'm seeing accuracy that some bolt guns would be envious of. So here again, I'm extremely happy with the Springfield Armory M1A loaded and the type of performance that I'm getting from the Leatherwood M1000 scope. So that's the video, folks. I hope you enjoyed my review of my Springfield Armory M1A loaded rifle and the Leatherwood M1000 scope. Truthfully, this scope probably deserves a video of its own to talk about all the functions and features of the M1000, and that's probably going to be coming in the future. But that's it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, as always, be sure to forward those to me. Remember, if you order anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off anything you purchase from Optics Planet. See you next time, folks, and until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.